Hey, Waspinator? Oh shit. Oh my god. What did you do? Oh no. They didn't like, subscribe, and comment on your videos, did they? And you took your own life. Oh well. Let's find another host. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see. Oh, he left a suicide note. Okay. Let's see. Waspinator's last words. After much reflection, I'm going to go out on a limb and say something rather controversial. Star Wars is more of a work of hard science fiction than Star Trek. Wait, what? Those movies about space wizards? Are you nuts? Well, yes, but that doesn't refute my conclusion. Most of the blame is with Star Trek itself, and its horrible inconsistencies within its own established setting. Warp drive that flies at the speed of plot, and judging from dialogue in some of the earliest episodes, works by creating a warp in time as much as space, possibly to negate the effects of temporal distortions at high speeds. Whether or not there is any math to back up the idea is inconsequential compared to the suspension of disbelief needed when one considers the actual amount of energy needed for such a thing, supposedly on the order of an entire galaxy's energy output. Hyperdrive, meanwhile, only requires enough technology needed to breach hyperdimensional barriers. Hypothetically, the energy requirements for such would be much, much lower than that needed to manipulate the space time fabric itself to create a warp effect. And speaking of energy requirements, Star Wars is a universe where ships still need stuff like fuel and propellant to move about. Vessels in Star Trek, on the other hand, operate with some form of frictionless impulse drive, yet another form of Star Trek tech that works at the speed of plot. And let's not get into transporters. That's a whole other subject in and of itself. No. Perhaps the key here is that Star Trek is actually portraying a more advanced technological society than that found in that galaxy far, far away. It's not supposition, really. I mean, it's very much more advanced. I don't see too much evidence of energy to matter conversion technology in the Star Wars universe. While in Trek, it's so cheap that everyone has a true replicator in their bathroom. But perhaps the old adage that sufficiently high technology is indistinguishable from magic cuts both ways. Teleporting around, disintegrating people left and right, they're basically gods, and it's no wonder they're leery about sharing their toys with lesser species. But herein lies another argument for why Star Wars is more hard in the sci fi department. Its aliens actually look like, aliens, and not just humans with broken noses. Yes, yes, the requirements of being a cheap television series being what they are and all, but still, Trek ultimately had to go to some trouble to try to explain away why everyone is a humanoid. Star Wars doesn't have to do that. While there are a few close to human species like Twi'leks, the vast bulk of Star Wars' menagerie is satisfyingly unearthly. So the real case against Star Wars boils down to two things. One, the original storyline was based on epic mythology, and two, the Force is all magical and shit. The answer to the first point, so what? Star Trek was pitched as wagon train in space. It doesn't make it a Western. Similarly, Star Wars is not high fantasy. It just borrows a lot of its tropes, just like Star Trek does with Westerns in the case of Deep Space Nine. Also, I would add that the hero's journey stuff was only really in the classic trilogy. The prequels were not at all based on that model. They were historical dramas about figures of note. There was no call to action in any of these. Everyone was already important people in their own ways, even young Anakin in Episode 1. The prequels were largely based on real world historical events, largely from the rise and fall of Imperial Rome with a healthy dash of modern intrigue. If half of the Lucasfilms are not based on epic myth, then I do not see that all of Star Wars can be painted with the fantasy brush. Luke's story was the hero's journey, which is in part why it was the best part, and the one Lucas wanted to tell first and foremost. Now, regarding the Force. The simple answer is it is not magical. People who have little to no knowledge of it think of it as wizardry or some form of old religion, but it is in fact a pseudo-psychic ability to gain access to effects drawn from an energy being that inhabits the entire galaxy. The living force, as it were. All the available evidence points to the conclusion that the Force is some sort of energy-based organism tied to that specific galaxy that can interact with the smaller life forms within it through the midichlorians, and apparently we now know that whatever the wills are, they are feeding off the Force, which goes along with the idea that it is alive in an abstract fashion. Frankly, the Force is better justified as a phenomenon than virtually any display of psychic power depicted throughout the decades on the various Star Trek series. There is no mechanism for Troy to sense the emotions of someone on another ship or planet, but there is a mechanism for every wonder worked by the Jedi and Sith alike. So is my conclusion subjective? Sure it is. It largely hinges on three factors: a more approachable tech level, more diverse aliens, and a built-in explanation for outlandish powers. Comment below if you agree or disagree, and hit that like and subscribe.